Let's explain this, shall we? In very simple English, Darren McCaffrey, GBNews' political editor. Darren, we've seen lots of U-turns from this government, but this one, within a space of 24 hours, is pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, Nigel. As you say, this government has gotten well used to U-turns, but none quite so quick or, I would say, as dramatic and as important as the one that we've seen in the last 24 hours or so. Owen Paterson had been investigated for a long time. We know that the Standards Commissioner ruled against him, essentially that he was misusing his position to get access to ministers, and access at a cost, it must be said. He was earning £100,000 a year on top of his MP salary from two different companies. That was a conclusion that was backed by the MP's Standards Committee, who felt also that he had committed egregious acts, and that is why he was given this 30-day suspension. The difficulty really came, though, on Tuesday night, when the government briefed to newspapers that they were going to change the rules, to change the game, essentially. They wanted to get rid of the current process and implement a new one, and it would be applied retrospectively, and that's the interesting thing, retrospectively, so that Owen Paterson potentially could have seen that decision overturned. And that was an element of discomfort, it must be said, for a lot of Conservative MPs who felt that this was not just MPs marking their own homework, but this was potentially the Conservative Party helping out a senior member of their own party simply because they wanted to, rather than it was because it was within the rules. And then, as you say, we had that backlash. Many MPs, many Conservative MPs, uncomfortable with the three-line whip of having to support the government's action on all this. A stink, it must be said, amongst members of the public who were writing into their MPs, and those damaging headlines in many national newspapers. And then this morning, Rees-Mogg, without Owen Paterson's knowledge, it must be said, stood up in the House of Commons and said, actually, forget about what you voted on yesterday. We're not going to go ahead with those current plans. Essentially, we're going to have a full-fat U-turn. Let's have a listen to what the Leader of the House of Commons said a little earlier today.
Mr. Speaker, I am also aware that last night's vote has created a certain amount of controversy. It is important that standards in this House are done on a cross-party basis. The House voted very clearly yesterday to show that it is worried about the process of handling these complaints and that we would like an appeal system, but that change would need to be on a cross-party basis, and that is clearly not the case. While there is a very strong feeling on both sides of the House that there is a need for an appeals process, there is equally a strong feeling that this should not be based on a single case or applied retrospectively. I fear last night's debate conflated the individual case with the general concern. This link needs to be broken. Therefore, I and others will be looking to work on a cross-party basis to achieve improvements in our system for future cases. We will bring forward more detailed proposals once there have been cross-party discussions.
Now, following that announcement to the Commons, Nigel, clearly Owen Paterson could see, first of all, he'd been ditched by Downing Street, that the writing was on the wall, and that is why he issued this statement saying that he was going to step down as an MP for Shropshire, saying that he wanted now a life outside of what he called the cruel world of politics, that had been an indescribable nightmare for his family and for himself. Of course, he blames this whole investigation for one of the reasons that his wife, very sadly, committed suicide last year, and that he repeated time and again that he was entirely innocent. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, also issued a statement saying he was sad to see Owen Paterson go. Of course, he had served twice under David Cameron as a cabinet minister. But in the end, aside from the kind of personal difficulty that Owen Paterson has found himself in, this is very, very difficult for the government on two levels. First of all, for Conservative MPs, many of them did not want to go through that lobby last night or yesterday afternoon and back the government, but they did, only for the government to U-turn less than 24 hours later. Where is that trust? Will they be willing to do it again in the future? And second of all, for public opinion, Labour today is saying that Boris Johnson had marched MPs through a sewer. The Lib Dems branding this as a Super League moment. for the government. As you say, sleaze and corruption, again associated with the Conservative Party. Will that translate into public opinion, potentially being a bit more sceptical about the Tories on some of these key issues? It'll be interesting to see. There will be a by-election in North Shropshire. Owen Paterson had a thumping majority, though the Conservatives also had one in a recent by-election in Amersham as well, and they managed to lose. I think the politics of this is fascinating. What we can all conclude, though, there are big questions about the Downing Street operation, Nigel, and Boris Johnson's political antennae, that they didn't game this out and essentially see this absolute fiasco coming.